Her voice on the voicemail was cold, calculated, every word chosen to cut deeper than the last. "You don't deserve anything. This family will always own you." I played it back 3 times, standing in the bedroom that no longer felt like mine, surrounded by furniture I could no longer claim, wearing clothes I wasn't sure I had permission to pack. My hands shook as I folded sweaters into a suitcase I had hidden in the back of the closet, moving quietly even though no one else was home, conditioned by months of surveillance to assume I was always being watched. The bank statement sat on the bed, that single piece of paper that confirmed what I had suspected but hoped wasn't true. Zero balance. Accounts I had built over years of careful saving gone. Transferred without my knowledge, without my consent, using authorizations I never gave, but somehow carried my signature. I tried the bedroom door one more time, knowing it was locked from the outside, knowing the key had been taken weeks ago under the pretense of safety and security. The lock mechanism broke under pressure, cheap hardware that was never meant to contain anyone, just meant to send a message about who had control. Her mistake wasn't taking everything from me. It was assuming she knew who my father really was. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The questions started forming long before I had answers, echoing in my mind during sleepless nights and silent dinners where every word felt monitored and measured. Where does control end and abuse begin? How far will someone go to maintain power over another person's life? What happens when family becomes prison and love becomes leverage? I had asked myself these questions in whispers, afraid even my thoughts might somehow be reported back to her, analyzed, used against me in ways I couldn't predict. Patricia Whitmore, my mother-in-law, had perfected the art of control disguised as care, manipulation wrapped in concern, abuse delivered with a smile that never quite reached her cold blue eyes. She took my money, my independence, my identity, piece by piece, so gradually I didn't realize I was being dismantled until there was almost nothing left of the person I used to be. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known because she never bothered to look beyond her own assumptions and prejudices, would be the mistake that ended everything she had built. If you're finding this story compelling, hit that like button and let us know in the comments what you think so far. I met David Whitmore on a Tuesday afternoon in October at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago where I was working on a freelance graphic design project, and he was escaping from a corporate meeting that had run too long. He was quiet, thoughtful, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke, who asked questions about my work with genuine interest rather than performative politeness. We talked for 2 hours that first day, and when he asked for my number, there was something refreshing about his straightforwardness, his lack of games or manipulation. He called when he said he would, showed up on time, remembered details from previous conversations, treated me like an equal rather than a prize to be won. 6 months later, he proposed at the same coffee shop where we met, and I said yes because I loved him, because I believed in the life we could build together, because I thought I understood what I was getting into. I was wrong about that last part. The warning signs were there from the beginning, small moments I dismissed or rationalized because I wanted to believe the best about the family I was marrying into. Patricia was charming at first, all smiles and warmth and enthusiastic welcomes, telling me how happy she was that David had finally found someone, how she had been worried about him being alone, how she couldn't wait for us to become close. But underneath the warmth was something else, a current of assessment and judgment, like I was being evaluated against criteria I didn't know and couldn't meet. She asked questions that seemed casual but carried weight. What did my parents do? Where did I grow up? What kind of education did I have? What were my career plans? Each answer was received with a smile and a nod, but I could feel her calculating, categorizing, deciding whether I was good enough for her son, for her family, for the image she had constructed of what their life should look like. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We share stories like this every week that you won't want to miss. The wedding was beautiful and suffocating in equal measure. Patricia insisted on planning everything, claimed she wanted to give us the perfect day as her gift, but every decision became a battlefield where my preferences were gently dismissed and her vision was implemented. The venue she chose, not the one David and I had discussed. The guest list she controlled, including people I had never met and excluding friends she deemed inappropriate. The dress she approved after rejecting 3 others I loved, claiming they weren't formal enough, weren't suitable for a Whitmore family wedding. David asked me to compromise, to let his mother have this because it meant so much to her, because fighting wasn't worth the stress, because it was just one day, and then we could live our own lives. I compromised. I wish I hadn't. That first concession established a pattern that would define the next 3 years of my life, a slow erosion of boundaries where every time I gave an inch, Patricia took a mile, and David stood by asking me to understand, to be patient, to remember that family was important. We moved into an apartment I chose, but Patricia had a key within a week, arriving unannounced with decorating suggestions that were really demands, rearranging furniture while I was at work, replacing items she deemed unsuitable. When I objected, David asked me to let it go, said his mother was just trying to help, that I was being ungrateful for her generosity and attention. The first financial entanglement started innocently, or at least that's how it was presented. Patricia offered to help us with a down payment on a house, said she wanted to invest in our future, that families should support each other. The house she helped us buy was 3 blocks from her own, close enough that she could walk over any time, which she did, daily, letting herself in with the key David had given her despite my protests. Comment below if you've ever dealt with someone who slowly took control of your life. We'd love to hear your experiences. The joint bank account was her idea, presented as practical financial planning during a family dinner where I was outnumbered 3-1, Patricia and her husband Richard and David all nodding along to her logic. She said it made sense for family to have access to each other's finances in case of emergency, that it was just responsible planning, that it didn't mean anything would change but provided security and peace of mind. I hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, Patricia's eyes hardened just slightly, enough for me to see the woman beneath the warm facade, the person who didn't accept being told no. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea to go along, to not make this difficult. I signed the paperwork. Within a month, I noticed money moving in ways I hadn't authorized, small amounts at first, transfers marked as household expenses or family obligations. When I asked David about it, he said his mother was helping us manage things better, that she had more experience with finances, that I shouldn't worry about details because everything was being handled. The amounts grew larger. My paychecks from freelance work were deposited into the joint account and then redistributed according to budgets I never saw, allocated to expenses I didn't recognize. When I tried to open a separate account, just something small for my own security, Patricia found out within days. She arrived at the house with tears in her eyes, asking why I didn't trust the family, why I was trying to hide money, whether I was planning to leave her son. David believed her emotional performance, asked me to close the account to prove my commitment, to show that I was really part of the family, and not just using them. I closed it. Another boundary gone. Like this video if you're finding these details eye-opening and want to hear how this unfolds. The physical control started gradually, implemented through a series of crises that Patricia seemed to create and then solve. First, she insisted we needed better home security, had a system installed that she controlled, cameras in every room that she could access remotely under the guise of checking on things when we traveled. Then she suggested she should have medical power of attorney for both of us, just in case something happened, just for family safety. Then she convinced David that I was stressed and overwhelmed, that I needed help managing the household, and suddenly there was a housekeeper who reported everything to Patricia, who went through my belongings under the pretense of cleaning and organizing. My personal items started disappearing, photographs from before I met David, journals, small inheritances from my own family. When I asked where things had gone, I was told they were stored safely, or that I must have misplaced them, or that they had been damaged and disposed of for my own good. The phone monitoring was explained as a family plan benefit, all our phones linked together for convenience and cost savings, but I noticed Patricia always seemed to know where I was, who I was talking to, what I was looking at online. My friends started dropping away, some because they found Patricia's constant presence intrusive, others because she had poisoned David against them with carefully constructed concerns about their character or intentions. I was being isolated, methodically cut off from every external support system, every source of identity that wasn't filtered through the Whitmore family and Patricia's control. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our weekly stories about family dynamics and hidden truths. The psychological pressure was constant and exhausting, a drip of guilt and gaslighting that made me question my own perceptions and memories. Patricia would make a cutting comment, then deny she had said it, suggesting I was too sensitive or misremembering, that stress was affecting my judgment. She would create problems between David and me, planting seeds of doubt through concerned observations about my behavior, my commitment, my fitness as a wife. David, desperate to keep peace and programmed since childhood to trust his mother's judgment, believe her more often than he believed me, chose her interpretation of events over mine, sided with her in conflicts while asking me to be more understanding and flexible. I started documenting things, keeping notes on my laptop about conversations and incidents, but when Patricia found them during one of her unannounced organization sessions, she presented them to David as evidence that I was obsessive and paranoid, that I needed professional help. The therapist she found for me was someone in her social circle, someone who reported back to her, who spent our sessions suggesting I needed to work on being more grateful, more accommodating, more accepting of family involvement. I stopped going. I stopped fighting. I learned to smile and nod and agree, to suppress every instinct of self-preservation, to become smaller and quieter until I was barely recognizable to myself. And then one morning, I woke up to find that everything was gone. Not physically gone, but legally, financially, fundamentally removed from my control. The bank accounts I checked showed zero balances, my name still listed but no access rights, all funds transferred overnight to accounts I couldn't see. The house deed had been refinanced, my name removed through documents I never signed but that somehow carried my signature, witnessed and notarized. The car registered in my name had been transferred. Even my identification documents had disappeared from where I kept them, my passport and birth certificate and social security card, taken from the locked drawer that only I had the key to or thought I had. Comment I'm still here if you're following along and want to see what happens next. When I confronted Patricia, she was calm, almost bored by my distress, like this was all a tiresome formality she had to endure. She told me very simply that this was how things were now, that I had proven myself unsuitable for financial responsibility, that the family was taking care of things properly. She said I should be grateful, that many women in my position would have been removed from the household entirely, but that she was being generous by allowing me to stay as long as I behaved appropriately. When I said I would go to the police, she laughed, that cold crystalline laugh that made my skin crawl. She told me that would be a mistake, that everything had been done legally, that I had signed all the documents myself even if I didn't remember it, that any investigation would just reveal my own instability and inability to manage my affairs. She had doctors' reports from the therapist suggesting I was having memory issues, bank statements showing erratic spending she had fabricated, character witnesses who would testify to my increasingly concerning behavior. She had built a perfect trap, documented and witnessed and seemingly legitimate, and I had walked into it step by trusting step because I loved her son and wanted to believe family meant safety. That night, David came home late from a business trip Patricia had arranged, and when I tried to tell him what had happened, what his mother had done, he looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration. He said his mother had warned him I might have a breakdown, that the stress of marriage and adult responsibilities was overwhelming me, that she had everything under control and I just needed to rest and let the family take care of things. He had chosen her. He had always been going to choose her. I realized then that I had two options. I could accept this new reality, become the controlled and managed wife Patricia wanted, exist in a cage made of family obligation and legal manipulation. Or I could fight back, but to fight back, I would need help, and the only help powerful enough to challenge Patricia Whitmore's carefully constructed control would come from the one person I had been avoiding involving, the one person I knew could burn down everything she had built, but whose intervention would cost me in ways I wasn't sure I wanted to pay. Like and share if the story is resonating with you, and you want others to hear it too. I called my father from a burner phone I bought with cash I had hidden in a book Patricia hadn't gotten around to organizing yet. The conversation was brief, just enough to explain the situation, and his response was exactly what I expected, calm, and controlled with an underlying tone that would have terrified me if I had been the target. He told me not to worry, not to do anything else, not to confront anyone or make any moves that might alert them I had outside help coming. He told me to act normal, to play the role of the defeated wife for just a few more days, and then everything would change. My father, Marcus Chin, was not who Patricia thought he was when she ran her background checks and made her assumptions based on the modest neighborhood where I grew up and the unassuming way my parents lived. She saw a retired civil servant and his quiet wife, people without wealth or connections, people who couldn't threaten her control or challenge her power. What she didn't see, because she never bothered to look deeper than surface appearances, was that my father had spent 30 years working in federal financial crimes investigation, specializing in cases involving fraud, embezzlement, and illegal wealth transfers. He had retired from his official position but continued consulting for private clients and government agencies, tracking money through complex systems, unraveling schemes that seemed untouchable, bringing down people who thought they were too smart or too powerful or too well-connected to face consequences. Patricia had no idea that every document she forged, every transfer she authorized without consent, every piece of her carefully constructed control structure left digital fingerprints that someone with my father's skills and resources could follow and expose and use to systematically dismantle everything she had built. Subscribe if you want to see more stories where power dynamics shift and justice gets served. The investigation took 4 days, though my father had probably mapped out most of it in the first few hours, methodical and thorough the way he approached everything. He didn't tell me details while it was happening, just called once a day to check that I was safe and maintaining my cover of normalcy. I went through the motions, smiled when Patricia came by with her daily instructions and criticisms, sat quietly through dinner while she discussed plans for renovating my house and redirecting my future, acted like I had accepted my new reality as a controlled and managed accessory to the Whitmore family. David noticed I seemed calmer, more resigned, and he seemed relieved, like my surrender meant the family conflict was finally over and things could return to comfortable routine. Patricia noticed too, and I could see the satisfaction in her eyes, the pleasure she took in believing she had finally broken me, finally molded me into something appropriate and manageable. She had no idea what was coming. On the 5th day, my father called and told me to pack essentials, only what mattered personally, and to be ready to leave when he arrived. He showed up at noon with a lawyer named Jennifer Morrison, who carried herself with the kind of quiet competence that comes from winning cases everyone said couldn't be won, and a folder that looked thin but contained everything needed to burn Patricia's world down. They sat in the living room, my father in the chair near the window, calm and still in a way that made the space feel smaller, and Jennifer on the couch with documents spread in front of her like evidence at a trial. When Patricia arrived, letting herself in with her key as usual, she started to object to strangers being in the house, but something in my father's expression made her stop mid-sentence, made her actually pause and assess the situation, made her realize for the first time that maybe she had made a mistake. Comment below what you think Patricia's reaction was when she realized who she was dealing with. Jennifer spoke first, her voice professional and devastatingly precise. She laid out every crime Patricia had committed, every forgery and fraud and illegal transfer, with documentation and timestamps and digital trails that removed any possibility of denial or excuse. She explained that federal authorities had been notified and were reviewing the case, that criminal charges were being considered for identity theft, financial elder abuse statutes that applied despite my age because of the pattern of coercion and control, and fraud schemes that crossed state lines and involved significant amounts of money. She explained that civil suits were being prepared to recover all assets, to reverse all transfers, to undo every piece of the control structure Patricia had built. She explained that Patricia's own finances were being investigated now too, that scrutiny of her methods with me had revealed interesting patterns in how she managed family money generally, that there were questions about Richard's business accounts and trust funds meant for David, that the entire Whitmore financial structure was about to be examined by people who knew exactly what to look for and how to find it. Patricia tried to bluster, to threaten, to claim this was all a misunderstanding, but Jennifer cut through every word with calm legal precision, pointing to specific documents, specific laws, specific consequences. She offered one chance to resolve this quietly. Patricia would immediately return all assets, would sign legally binding documents relinquishing all control or claim to anything related to me, would agree to supervise contact with David only if he chose to maintain relationship with her, and would commit to therapy and monitoring. In exchange, criminal charges would be reduced or potentially dismissed depending on cooperation and restitution, and the details wouldn't be made public in ways that would destroy her social standing. If Patricia refused, everything would go to trial, everything would become public record, and Jennifer guaranteed that Patricia would face not just financial ruin but criminal conviction and potential incarceration. Like this video if you appreciate seeing manipulators face real consequences for their actions. The silence that followed was heavy, and I watched Patricia's face cycle through emotions, denial and anger and fear and calculation, looking for escape routes that didn't exist, trying to find leverage she no longer had. She looked at David, who had arrived home during the presentation and stood frozen in the doorway, and I saw her realize that even her son couldn't save her from this, that the power she had wielded so confidently had evaporated the moment someone with greater power decided to act. She looked at my father, and I saw her finally understand who he was, what he was capable of, why her background checks and assumptions had been catastrophically insufficient. She had controlled me by making me believe I was powerless, by cutting me off from resources and support, by constructing a reality where she held all the cards. But I had never been powerless. I had just been isolated from someone who could help me fight back, and now that connection was reestablished and her entire structure was collapsing. She signed the documents. All of them. Every piece of paper Jennifer put in front of her, every acknowledgement of wrongdoing, every agreement to relinquish control. She did it in silence, her hands shaking slightly, her face pale, all the confidence and superiority drained away until she was just a woman facing consequences she had assumed she was too smart and too powerful to ever experience. The asset transfers were reversed within 48 hours, every account restored, every document corrected, my name put back on deeds and titles and ownership papers. The house was mine again. The money was mine again. More importantly, my identity was mine again, my autonomy restored, my right to make decisions and live my life without supervision or management returned through legal instruments that made Patricia's previous control officially and permanently illegal. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories about hidden power and family secrets. David and I separated 2 weeks later, not dramatically or angrily, but quietly and sadly, because we both understood that our marriage had been built on foundations that couldn't survive this exposure. He was devastated by what his mother had done, shocked by the extent of it, but also defensive and unwilling to fully acknowledge his own role in enabling her control. He kept saying he didn't know, that he thought his mother was just trying to help, that if I had told him how bad it was he would have stopped it. But I had told him, over and over, in ways both direct and subtle, and he had chosen not to see, chosen to believe his mother's version over mine, chosen family loyalty over investigating uncomfortable truths. That pattern wouldn't change just because the extent of the problem had been exposed. He would always choose her, or at least would always struggle between us, and I couldn't build a life on that uncertainty. We divorced amicably, settled everything fairly, and I think part of him was relieved. Like my leaving solved a problem he didn't know how to address. Patricia faced consequences, though not as severe as she probably deserved. The criminal charges were ultimately reduced to probation and restitution after her lawyers negotiated extensively and she agreed to full cooperation. Her social standing took more damage than her legal status, whispers spreading through her circles about financial impropriety and family trouble, enough that several of her carefully maintained relationships became distant and cool. Richard divorced her 6 months later, citing reasons that were never made fully public, but that everyone understood had to do with what the investigations had revealed about her character and methods. David maintains minimal contact with her, supervised visits and occasional phone calls, and I think he struggles with guilt about that limitation but knows it's necessary for his own health and future relationships. I rebuilt my life slowly, reclaiming pieces of identity that had been suppressed or stolen, reconnecting with friends I had lost, pursuing work I was passionate about rather than projects Patricia deemed appropriate. I moved to a different city, started fresh in ways both practical and emotional, created space between myself and the trauma of those 3 years. Comment what you would have done if you were in this situation. We're curious about different perspectives. My father and I have gotten closer since this happened, in ways we couldn't when I was trying to maintain distance to prove my independence and adulthood. I understand him better now. Understand why he built his career around exposing financial predators and protecting vulnerable people. Understand the satisfaction he must take in using his skills to help people escape situations they can't escape alone. He never said "I told you so" about David or the warning signs he had noticed but not mentioned, just helped me rebuild and offered quiet support while I figured out who I was without Patricia's control or David's mediation. He did tell me once, during a dinner where we were both finally able to laugh about some of the more absurd moments of the situation, that Patricia's mistake wasn't trying to control me specifically. It was assuming control could work on someone who had resources she didn't understand and family she hadn't properly investigated. He said predators like her succeed by isolating prey, by making people believe they have no options and no help, and that the moment that isolation breaks, the moment outside power enters the situation, the entire structure collapses because it was always built on perception rather than reality. I think about that sometimes, about how many people are trapped in situations like mine, controlled by family members or partners who use similar tactics, who feel powerless because they've been systematically cut off from resources and support. I think about how many of them don't have a father with my father's specific skills and resources, how many of them stay trapped because they can't see a way out or don't believe anyone would help them or don't know where to turn. The system isn't built to protect people from family abuse, especially financial and psychological abuse that doesn't leave visible marks, that happens behind closed doors, that's documented and justified through legal structures that make the victim look unstable while the abuser looks concerned and responsible. Like and share this story if you think it's important for people to understand how financial control works in families. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I missed or rationalized, the moments where Patricia showed her true character, but I chose to believe the best because I wanted David's family to be my family too. The way she needed to be the center of attention at every gathering, not obviously, but through subtle management of conversations and activities. The way she couldn't tolerate being wrong or challenged, even on minor points, reacting with disproportionate cold anger to any disagreement. The way she talked about other people in her life, always positioning herself as victim or hero, never acknowledging her own mistakes or flaws. The way she collected information about people and then used it strategically, not maliciously necessarily, but with calculated precision, knowing exactly which emotional buttons to push. The way she isolated her son, made him dependent on her approval and guidance, sabotaged his relationships with anyone who might challenge her primacy in his life. I see those patterns clearly now, understand how they escalated from personality traits to abusive behavior, how the control that seemed like caring at first became imprisonment. I wish I had seen it sooner, had trusted my instincts instead of doubting them, had drawn harder boundaries before the situation became critical. But I also know that predators like Patricia are skilled at making you doubt yourself, at making control seem normal and resistance seem unreasonable, at constructing reality in ways that make you the problem rather than them. That's their power, and it's effective until someone from outside can show you what's really happening and help you escape. The question I get asked most when I share this story is whether justice was truly served, whether Patricia faced enough consequences for what she did, whether the resolution actually balanced the harm. I don't have a simple answer. She lost money and reputation and relationships, faced legal consequences and public embarrassment, had her control exposed and permanently removed. But she didn't go to jail, didn't lose everything, didn't face the full weight of what she actually deserved based on the systematic nature of her abuse. The legal system isn't built to deliver perfect justice, especially in cases like this where the abuse is psychological and financial rather than physical, where the victim is an adult who theoretically could have left but was trapped through more subtle means. So maybe justice wasn't fully served, but balance was restored, power was shifted, and I was freed from a situation that would have consumed me if it had continued. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into family manipulation and how people escape control. I also get asked whether I blame David for what happened, whether he was victim or enabler, whether he deserves sympathy or judgment. That's complicated too. He was programmed from childhood to serve his mother's needs, to prioritize her feelings, to doubt his own judgment when it conflicted with hers. He was absolutely a victim of her control in ways that shaped his entire personality and worldview. But he was also an adult who made choices, who chose to believe his mother over his wife repeatedly, who enabled her access and power, who refused to see what was happening even when I explicitly told him. He was both victim and enabler, both trapped and complicit, and while I have compassion for the person he might have been without Patricia's influence, I also hold him accountable for the person he chose to be in our marriage. Some people can break free from family programming and some can't, and he couldn't or wouldn't, and that reality ended our relationship regardless of sympathy or blame. The experience changed how I think about family and trust and relationships generally. I'm more cautious now, slower to merge lives and finances, quicker to notice when boundaries are being tested or control is being asserted. I pay attention to how people treat others who have less power, how they respond to being told no, how they handle conflict and disagreement. I trust my instincts more and apologize for them less. I understand that love doesn't require surrendering autonomy, that family doesn't mean unlimited access, that caring for someone doesn't give you the right to control them. These seem like obvious truths, but they weren't obvious to me when I was in the middle of it, when I was being told that resistance meant I wasn't committed, that boundaries meant I didn't trust, that protecting myself meant I was selfish. Patricia's greatest weapon was making control seem like love, and the most important thing I learned was how to tell the difference. Comment power shift if you're glad to see someone escape this kind of control and rebuild their life. 3 years later, I'm in a new relationship with someone named Alex who respects boundaries, who encourages my independence, who understands that healthy love creates space rather than constraints. We have separate finances and clear agreements about decision-making and explicit conversations about family involvement. His parents are kind and respectful, interested in my life without needing to control it, and the difference between that dynamic and what I experience with Patricia is like comparing sunlight to suffocation. I still have moments of anxiety when Alex's mother offers to help with something, still catch myself expecting manipulation when there isn't any, still carry trauma responses from those 3 years of systematic control. But I'm healing, slowly, with therapy that's actually therapeutic rather than performative, with support systems I choose rather than ones imposed on me, with life I'm actively building rather than one being built around me. I've also started consulting with my father's firm occasionally, using my experience to help identify financial control patterns in other cases, offering perspective on how these situations look from inside, contributing to investigations that free other people from similar traps. It feels meaningful, turning pain into purpose, using what I learned to help others escape what I escaped. My father says I'm good at it, that I notice things other investigators miss because I've lived it, because I understand the psychology and methodology from both sides. Maybe something good can come from those 3 years after all, not redemption exactly, but transformation, taking damage and turning it into something useful and protective. Patricia and I will never speak again. That's guaranteed through legal agreements and personal choice. I hear updates occasionally through mutual acquaintances that she moved to Arizona, that she's involved in church groups and charity organizations, that she presents herself as a woman who survived family betrayal rather than someone who perpetrated it. I don't bother correcting that narrative when it filters back to me. People who want to believe her version will believe regardless of evidence, and the people whose opinions I value know the truth. She can reconstruct whatever reality she needs to live with herself, as long as it stays far away from me. The most important thing is that she has no power over me anymore, no access to my life, no ability to influence or control or manipulate. That freedom, that fundamental autonomy, is worth more than any apology or acknowledgement she could never genuinely offer. Like this video if you believe in the importance of exposing family control and financial abuse. When I think about that voicemail now, that cold declaration that the family would always own me, I feel something different than the fear and desperation I felt when I first heard it. I feel almost grateful, because that moment of shocking clarity, that explicit statement of how Patricia saw me and what she intended, was what finally pushed me to reach out for help I had been avoiding asking for. If she had continued being more subtle, more careful with her words, I might have stayed trapped longer, might have continued doubting myself, might have accepted the gradual erosion of autonomy as normal relationship compromise. Her arrogance, her certainty that she was untouchable and I was powerless, that was what created the opening for intervention. She got sloppy because she believed her own narrative of dominance, and that sloppiness gave my father the evidence he needed to build an unassailable case. Abusers often do this eventually, get too confident, overreach, make mistakes because they stop believing anyone can challenge them. That overconfidence becomes their downfall if the victim can survive long enough to exploit it. I'm sharing this story not for sympathy or attention, but because I know there are people watching who are in similar situations, who feel trapped by family dynamics they can't escape, who believe they have no options because someone has convinced them they're powerless. I want them to know that help exists, that escape is possible, that the control that seems absolute has weaknesses if you know where to look and who to ask. I want them to know that financial abuse is real abuse, that psychological control is real violence, that what's happening to them has names and patterns and legal remedies even if they can't see those things from inside the situation. I want them to know that family doesn't get unlimited chances, that blood doesn't excuse harm, that protecting yourself is not betrayal no matter how many times someone tells you it is. And I want them to know that whoever convinced them they're alone and powerless might be wrong about other things too, might not be as untouchable as they claim, might be vulnerable to challenges they haven't prepared for because they've gotten used to nobody fighting back. Subscribe for more true stories about manipulation, control, and the people who fight back and win. Whose side do you think was truly right in this situation? Have you ever seen someone try to control another person like this, using family obligations and legal structures to trap them? What would you have done if you were in my position, discovered 3 years into a marriage that your spouse's family had systematically taken over your life? These aren't rhetorical questions. I genuinely want to know how this story lands for different people, whether you see gray areas I'm not acknowledging, whether you think I should have done something different or sooner. Comment below. I read every response, and I'm curious about perspectives from people who haven't lived this exact situation but who might see patterns or warnings or lessons I'm still processing. If this story resonated with you, hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who might be experiencing control disguised as care and doesn't know how to name what's happening to them. And if you want to hear what happened next, how my relationship with David evolved after the divorce, or how Patricia's life unfolded in the years after this intervention, let me know in the comments and I'll consider sharing those updates. There are layers to this story I haven't covered, questions about how David is doing now, whether he ever fully understood what his mother did, whether he's repeated these patterns in new relationships or broken free from them. There's the question of whether Patricia ever genuinely reflected on her actions, or just reconstructed a narrative where she's the victim. There are conversations with my father about how common these patterns are, how many cases he's seen where family becomes prison, how often the victims don't escape because they don't know help is available or don't believe they deserve it. This story doesn't have a perfectly neat ending because life doesn't work that way, but it has an ending where I'm free and safe and rebuilding, and that's better than many people in similar situations ever achieve. What's your take? Comment below, and let's continue this conversation because I think understanding these dynamics, recognizing these patterns, naming these behaviors, that's how we prevent other people from experiencing what I experienced. That's how we create a culture where family control isn't normalized, where financial abuse is recognized and prosecuted, where victims know they have options and support. Check out the next video on screen if you want to hear another story about family secrets and hidden power dynamics, about someone who discovered their entire family history was built on lies and manipulations. These stories matter. These patterns need to be exposed and discussed and understood so that fewer people fall into these traps, so that warning signs are recognized earlier, so that help is sought before the damage becomes irreversible. Thank you for watching, for listening, for engaging with this difficult topic. Your comments and shares help these stories reach people who need them, who might be sitting in situations similar to mine, wondering if escape is possible, doubting whether what they're experiencing is actually abuse or just normal family dynamics. It is abuse. You deserve autonomy. You deserve freedom. And help exists if you're brave enough to reach for it. I'll see you in the next video.